Good morning and welcome to day 25 of the Coronavirus Geriatric 1944 Diaries. Half a century. Quarter of a century. Well, it would be quarter of a century if it was years and not days. 25 days. That's quarter of 100 days. Mind you, it feels like 25 years. And of course, just slightly altering the way you phrase things is a trick of the media for ages. And I'd like to talk about the media today. Yesterday, I went out in baby car and looked around the world. London is gorgeous, but it is getting back to normal. I'd say it's now back to 50% of what it was. Despite the government saying all the restrictions are still down and so on, I reckon about 50% of people are now out and about again. One of the pleasures of life is driving around when the sun's shining in my little baby car with the roof down. It's a hard top, but it all goes in the boot, and just enjoying the sunshine and the town and the world. Something I can still do during this period of lockdown because it combines exercise, shopping for food, and even the odd piece of medicine. So the media, well, you see, I know about the media. I started in the media when I was a teenager. I had a hit record in 1965 that I wrote and recorded when I was a teenager. At that point in 65, I think I just turned 20. I put the record out. It went to number one all over the world in many places. It sold about 9 million copies on vinyl. And even though I was on a tiny royalty, 2%, I made a lot of money, enough to buy my little house in London, which I still live in, for £18,650. It's now worth a great deal more than that, and I live here happily. So I do know the media, and the media has been very useful to me over the years. I've used the media more than almost anything else. My number one way of getting hit records was actually using word of mouth, getting people to spread the word. So giving people free promotion copies of records and telling them if they liked it to tell their friends and so on. That was incredibly potent. Then I used the media. One of the things I used with the media was hyping the charts. When you say hyping the charts, there were only about 50 shops in the whole of the UK who actually gave names and titles to the chart compilers outside the top 50. So I reckon by sending free records to those 50 shops and asking them to promote them to their customers, we might make the top 50, which was a media huge storm, of course, not only published everywhere, but Top of the Pops at the time was the most massive TV show, 18 or 19 million viewers a week, I seem to remember. So the media there was incredibly helpful, and it made me break lots of records, find lots of acts, and I like the ones I named and produced, Genesis, 10cc, shows I made and produced, the Rocky Horror Show, all those things, the Bay City Rollers. These were big successes of mine in the 70s and 80s, where I tended to move on to television and had the number one show on BBC Two, Entertainment USA, No Limits, which was equally massive, and lots of hit TV shows. So I do know the media and how it works. Well, the media cannot help but colour and inflate and exaggerate everything because it makes it a better story. So if 10 people have died in a car crash, the media actually says 20. And it goes that way and always has gone that way. It's nature. Like the story of the scorpion and the frog. You remember the scorpion was approached by the frog, or approached the frog, and there was a river to go across. Of course, the scorpion couldn't swim and said to the frog, look, do me a favour, carry me on your shoulders because you can swim across the river. And the frog said, no, it's ridiculous because you'll sting me and I'll die and I'll drown. And the scorpion said, well, no, that would be mad. We both die. And the frog said, yeah, but this is the way things go. And the scorpion finally persuaded the frog, got onto his shoulders, and the frog started swimming across the river, got halfway across, and the scorpion stings the frog. And as they're both sinking beneath the waves to death, The frog said to the scorpion, "Why did you do that?" And the scorpion said, "It's in my nature." And that is the media. It is the media's nature to inflate and overcolour everything. And that's what's happened now with this coronavirus, because it's a much better story if 100 people die rather than 50 people die. But it's even more of a story if you look at those 100 and you say, this is the end of the world. This is a plague. 100 people killed by this horrendous disease. The reality is people die all the time. Oh, by the way, I have to say it's a rule, an obligation in media, sadly. People, sadly, die all the time. And people die, sadly, about 2,000 a day in the United Kingdom, sadly, die because they die, sadly, of cancer or flu, when there's a bit of flu epidemic going on, which happens quite often, and even when they don't, people die of flu quite regularly. Probably more people in an ordinary flu season than die the whole of coronavirus, I have to tell you, and various other things as well. And so people die, sadly people die every day, but the media, of course, seizes on these and builds it up. And like if one of them happened to be a nurse in the NHS, it's front page stories. Nurse 28 dies, NHS nurse dies. Drama, oh God, the world is falling apart. Well, I'm sorry, nurses of 28 in the NHS die every day of cancer or heart attacks or some genetic disease or get run over by a bus or commit suicide or whatever. But the media are now concentrating on this. So actually, and I don't really blame the media. What I blame is the public, because we want them to do that. We are so superficial now, we can only exist with a great story. It used to be Brexit. It was Harry and Meghan. It was Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein and all Harvey Weinstein, all those sort of people. You know, we need a great story. I was a great story 20 years ago. Jonathan King, vile pervert, which I wasn't, and I'm not, and I was wrongly convicted, but let's move on from there. So we, the public, especially younger people, are now so superficial, we simply cannot cope with more complex stories. So the reality is the coronavirus is a trivial virus for 99% of the people that get it. Very mild symptoms, no symptoms at all or whatever. And for the 1% that it's serious, and it can be very serious, it can sometimes be lethal. And for that small percentage of the 1% that it's lethal, people sadly die. Yet the media has blown this up. And of course, the worst thing about that is the governments pick up, because the governments are controlled, not as they would like you to believe, by scientific and medical experts and all that. That's their excuse, the rubbish they talk. So you can't blame us. The doctors told us not to wear masks or whatever. The reality is the media controls the government completely. And the government, every action they take is, hang on a moment, if we don't do this, what will the media say about us? And we probably won't get voted in again or whatever. This applies even to dictatorships, communism and everything else. And don't forget, the media now is so wide it's uncontrollable, because you've got social media and everything else in there too. So all governments, all politicians are terrified of the media and therefore obey it. So when the media inflates something, that every government does the same. The next thing is, the way they compile the figures, I think, is so balmy. And the media only picks up on the great stories, and yet it's completely bizarre. I think this coronavirus, which is a fairly trivial virus, does kill a few people, as flu does and measles do and all the other ones do. But the percentages of how many die is so different in so many different countries. So you'll find some countries it will be very low amount of people die, other people it will be a huge amount. Well, I think it's the way they gather the figures. I don't think it's actually that it has different effects on different people. If you're German and you eat lots of potatoes and drink lots of beer, you're less likely to die. No. What's much more likely is the way the figures are compiled means that fewer people die in Germany. If, on the other hand, you're in Italy and you eat pasta, which is God knows lethal. Sadly, people die of eating pasta. Then the figures are inflated and huge quantities of people die. I think the reality is, over the world, it is a fairly trivial virus. It does kill a few people, as does flu, measles, whooping cough, polio, TB, car accidents, smoking, cancer, all the other things. But at the moment, this is the big story. Where it gets to be really trouble is when all the rules and regulations are put in practice, like self-isolation, which to me is just common sense, by the way. You get a cold, you get flu, you get coronavirus, you self-isolate until you're over it. You don't want to give it to other people. Isn't that just normal common sense? Anyway, it disappears and people just forget all about it. Well, there we go. That's my theory on it all. Most people disagree because, of course, they like to believe everything they're told in the media. Because without that, people being so superficial, there's nowhere they can go. You know, the era when we used to believe in God or religions or Islam or whatever are really dead and gone. Nobody cares about religions anymore. They've got to have something much simpler, please. And the simpler thing is believe the media. When it tells us something, obey instructions. Anyway, I do want to leave you with a song, one of mine that I really loved. I did ages and ages ago. It's never been a hit, but I still think it's one of my best tracks. And it's basically about me travelling up to Manchester on a train and seeing a homeless, impoverished old gentleman there sitting on the train and feeling sad for him because he was always sad about everything himself. So see if you enjoy it, and I'll try and give you a few amusing photos to look at. And here is a very, very melancholy man.
I was minding my own business on the Manchester Express train when an old man came and sat down who was obviously insane. He was talking to himself in a very funny way, and all the other people, one by one, decided not to stay, till eventually just he and I were sitting all alone, because I was interested in what he had to say when on his own. He said, "What's it all about? I often wonder. And why on earth is everybody here? Sometimes pressure is enough to drive me under. And like everyone, I'm so afraid of fear. All the world is getting harder. Oh, it's much too much to stand. That's why I'm such a very, very melancholy man." The conductor came for tickets, but he didn't stay too long. In fact, he swung around and went out when he realized what was wrong. Then the geezer coughed and wheezed a bit, complained about the cold, suggested putting on his overcoat, and mourned his getting old. Soon he paused in his soliloquy. He paused and scratched his head, then, assured of total privacy, addressed himself and said, "What's it all about? I often wonder. And why on earth is everybody here? Sometimes pressure is enough to drive me under. And like everyone, I'm so afraid of fear. All the world is getting harder. Oh, it's much too much to stand. That's why I'm such a very, very melancholy man." There's a difference between closing eyes and letting out a sigh, and I knew with sudden certainty the man was going to die. I rushed out into the corridor, and I fell from side to side as I ran to the conductor with his big mouth gaping wide. Well, between us, we both laid him down and tried to rest his head. But by the time we got to Manchester, the poor old man was dead. What's it all about? I often wonder. And why on earth is everybody here? Sometimes pressure is enough to drive me under. And like everyone, I'm so afraid of fear. Oh, all the world is getting hotter. Oh, it's much too much to stand. That's why I'm such a very, very melancholy man. All the world is getting hotter. Oh, it's much too much to stand. That's why I'm such a very, very melancholy man.